Today I'd like to explore a little bit the question, the area of emotional healing. It's actually a talk I've been wanting to give for a long time, but every time I reflect on it I realise, God, it's a huge subject and there's so much to it. So many different aspects and dimensions and approaches that I was like, oh, mañana. So in this talk, I can only really touch on some aspects of it. Second reason I was a little hesitant, or am a little hesitant to talk about it, is because this area, for a lot of people, very understandably, is quite charged in terms of views and opinions and feelings about it. And I remember in my practice, I actually stopped practicing for a few years in the late 80s because I felt at that time that the difficulties I was experiencing practice on a psychological level were not really being addressed by Vipassana practice at that time and what was around in the Vipassana sort of scene at that time. And I stopped and I worked very intensely for quite a number of years in psychodynamic psychotherapy. And if anyone had because I was working in that area, I had certain views around it. And if anyone had tried to convince me otherwise, I probably would have bit their head off, practically. And looking back, I can understand, how that was. But I guess the point I want to make is that really all I want to do today is to explore this whole area and just see some of its complexity, some of the different aspects. And always, talks and the Dharma is under the umbrella of the question, the Buddha's fundamental question: what is it that leads to suffering? Can I understand that? And can I understand what leads to freedom? So it's just an exploration with that question as a guide. And I won't go into in this talk so much about how to work meditatively in terms of technique, when emotions are difficult and it feels like one's going through something very intense emotionally. There are, of course, tapes in the library. I know definitely one, probably many tapes in the library that describe that. Or to talk to a teacher if you feel you need a little guidance in terms of technique. I mean, if we talk about Vipassana practice, the sort of main thrust of the practice is this real intimacy of presence. Okay, and this is what we go on about so much. That something's difficult emotionally. What are we bringing to it? We're bringing this intimacy so that we're really connecting with it. We're bringing an openness. We're really touching what's there. Touching what's difficult emotionally. And in this insight meditation tradition, a lot of the work is quite body-based, quite in touch with what's going on in the body. So the physical aspect of what's going on is very central to the way of working. And alongside that, this sort of not getting too wrapped up, too involved in the storyline and the content. So of course it may be there, but the way of working in a sort of strict Vipassana sense is not to get too involved with that, and to bring more of this raw openness, intimacy of attention into the body and the manifestation physically. So this aspect of attention is really, really crucial. It's a lot what we go on about all the time, mindfulness, attention. Something's quite interesting here. When there's a difficult emotion, or an emotion that feels like a pattern or a very negative kind of set that comes over the being, when that's there, almost invariably has a tendency to swallow up the energy of attention. So when this cloud of whatever it is descends, the attention energy is depressed, so to speak. It doesn't have the same energy. So has a lot of implications for working in practice. If we can somehow, on the cushion, in the walking, whatever it is, increase the energy of the attention. In other words, make the attention energized, very attentive. Really feed the attention. Then the energy of the emotion, which would otherwise swallow the attention energy, tends to decrease. They're basically like this. They're inversely proportional, whatever the scientists say. So that if the difficult emotion that's present is a kind of depressive emotion, just down, everything's down and dark and we don't seem to have any energy, this revamping of the energy of attention will then bring the energy level of the being up. Or, if the difficult emotion is very agitating, very hyper almost, then the energy invested in attention tends to calm that. This is very, very significant. Just seeing how much energy is there in attention right now, and can I somehow invest or increase that energy. So, as I said, I want to explore a little bit the views we have around healing. Oftentimes, and it's certainly a view that I held for quite a while, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, was that if I just feel my old emotions, or if I just feel the emotions, just being there and feeling it, that's healing. Now sometimes it may be, but oftentimes I don't think it is, that just to feel the difficult will be healing. I think it's rather in the relationship that we have with them in the present. That's a crucial factor among other aspects which I'll go into. But it's the relationship in the present that we have with a difficult emotion. So just feeling, God, this is really difficult, it's not enough. Well, maybe not enough. So a lot of what we're doing when we practice meditation is paying attention to developing, nurturing a really healthy and beautiful and balanced relationship with what's there. So this relating and presence is something we learn. We learn it slowly and gradually in practice. It's not, and most of us, it really is a very gradual learning, because we haven't learnt it anywhere else. How to really relate well, how to be present. That's hugely significant because then we're not compounding, we're not adding to the suffering of the difficult emotion. We're not adding to it with the suffering, with the dukkha of disconnection, which is so often the case. Something's difficult goes on, we'd rather just be somewhere else, just not connect. What happens then is a state of disconnection comes into the being, and that state of disconnection is a state of suffering. We're enlarging the dukkha. So what is very common for people of practice to realize at a certain point or gradually is that even when something's difficult, there can be a really lovely sort of wavelength of sweetness just in the fact of the connection, just in the presence. There's something about just being there, just softening around what's going on, just being open. Whatever it is difficult, but that presence itself has a really lovely healing sweetness. And this is very very tangible, very sensible in practice. So even grief or something, very difficult emotion. Somehow we're just opening, being present, being soft around it, and there's a real sweetness there, almost mixed in with the grief. grief actually is quite an interesting feeling in the dynamic of healing. Oftentimes we feel in our life that we have become somewhere along the line, somewhere along the years, we have become disconnected, cut off, shut off from some part of ourselves. And maybe also for years this has been going on without us even realizing it. It's quite common for people to sort of wake up and think, I've been shut off from my playfulness or my kindness or whatever it is for years. And in realizing that can come quite some grief. It's the grief of that realization. And grief's interesting in that context because it can very much act like a glue. So in a way we're weeping perhaps for ourselves, for our lives, what has been missed, what has been lost. And the grief actually, though it's difficult, it can work as a glue to reconnect the parts that were disconnected. So in just talking about Vipassana practice now, what we're really doing one of the things we're doing is we're gradually, slowly, developing the capacity to accommodate what's difficult emotionally. And this is usually a slow process. But gradually we really feel like we have more capacity to hold and to embrace, to accommodate what's difficult. That capacity to accommodate is a really important aspect of healing. Just that ability to hold, to be with, to embrace. And seeing a bigger picture of what's going on, we're also developing a lot of other qualities in just this presence, this opening to. We're developing courage, developing openness, developing confidence, which is often what we're really lacking in relation to really difficult emotions. We don't have confidence in face of them. Developing the inner resources to be with, to open to them, to ourselves in a really self-nurturing way. So to see the bigger picture of what's going on, all these factors are going on, they're all very important aspects of healing. And no one, I hope, no one would say that this is easy at all when the emotions are difficult. It's not at all easy. It needs to tread this path in this way, needs kindness. It needs patience. You can't force this. It needs interest, in a way we really need to get interested in what's there, in our relationship with it. It needs compassion, because there's suffering there. It actually also needs, if one's talking about balancing the practice, it needs periods of rest. So if there's something, if it feels like there's a lot of grief or a lot of difficulty coming up, maybe old feelings or whatever, not to feel like I need to work with it all the time, I need to be there all the time, I need to keep opening, and will be too much, or can be too much, too tiring. So really, really helpful, really, really skillful to sometimes take the time away from that and just be with the breath, place of rest, or with the metta practice, or walk in nature. Something that's a rest from what's difficult. But generally speaking, the thrust of mindfulness practice is this being with, this opening to, this intimacy with. And I think most of us are aware, we're quite sophisticated in a way psychologically. We can talk around, psychologically talk around our difficult emotions and what's coming. We could talk, for days on end even. And, whoever's listening is... sometimes that's useful, but sometimes just opening quietly, just quietly being with, just a quiet, simple presence to, can be so much, in a way, more healing. So the thrust of this practice, being with what is, opening to what is. And that means the fullness of life, which means what's lovely and what's difficult. So a lot of the agenda of this practice is really opening to the fullness of life, which includes what needs healing. So generally, we go on and on about mindfulness, and sometimes there can be a sense that if I'm just mindful, if I just see the suffering, that will be enough, that will do it. But oftentimes we realize, I've been mindful of this, it's just not enough. It's just not enough. I'm present to it, I'm bringing attention to it. It doesn't do it. Mindfulness is sometimes hyped up to be a sort of cure-all, as if it's going to really fix everything. And it's not realistic. Most people, my experience is, most people, when there's a problem in body or in mind or heart or whatever, when there's a problem, the attention goes to that problem. Goes to that problem. It's drawn to that problem. Sometimes the attention is actually part of the problem, and we don't tend to realize this. It's quite a subtle and deep way. The actual giving attention to what feels like a problem emotionally is actually somehow feeding. I'll go into this a bit more later on. So I very much feel there can be a real skill in, skillful non-attending, skillful, I was going to say spacing out, that's not really, skillful ignoring, which in a wholesome way. So I don't mean going to the refrigerator, getting a beer, overeating, TV, Valium, whatever. Wholesome, so what I was saying before, nature, metta, friendship, breath, these kind of things. Really wholesome non-attending. So mindfulness is not enough. It's more, other qualities really have to come in. One of them is kindness. Absolutely a crucial factor here in the relationship with what's going on is the kindness. Something difficult's going on emotionally. Can there be a kindness for myself there? This is suffering. Can I meet myself in this moment with kindness? In this moment, we could say that's not who I am. We could say in this moment that is who I am. Can I meet myself with kindness? Can I even meet the emotion with kindness, which means completely accepting that it's there, completely relaxing any wish to just scoot it out the door, hurry on out. Hugely important, the place of kindness, and to explore ways we can kind of implement and enlarge that in our practice. And of course, wisdom, the place of wisdom in all this. And the Buddha, when some of you were here when I talked about the Vedana, the contemplation of Vedana, and the Buddha says the strange thing in the four foundations of mindfulness: see the body in the body, see the feelings in the feelings, see the mind in the mind. And you think, what's he talking about? And he's talking about, don't see self in it. Don't see, I have this emotion, this fear, this grief, this whatever it is, therefore I'm a failure, therefore I'm damaged, therefore I'm a spiritual, whatever. Don't see self-judgment in it. Don't see comparing in it. It's actually quite difficult. But he says right at the beginning of the contemplation, just see it for what it is. Mind in the mind, heart in the heart, we could say. Actually, sometimes that's quite difficult. It's quite difficult not for self not to wrap itself around and identify and measure oneself and say, oh, I bet they're in a different place and I'm stuck with this is my history, etc. It's quite difficult. But this aspect of kindness, of bringing in, bathing oneself and what's going on with love is really significant in our ability to just see mind in the mind, just see heart in the heart, just see the emotion in the emotion. It acts as a softener. The love, the kindness acts as a softener of the experience and the relationship with the experience. So all that's a sort of typical traditional Vipassana approach, is the bringing of mindfulness and the care of the relationship to it. In a way, we could say that's one part or one wing of the path. But the whole other wing that exists, like two wings of a bird that it would need to fly, the whole other wing is the aspect of cultivation. Cultivation of what is beautiful. Cultivation of the lovely. And oftentimes, and especially actually in our tradition, because we put so much emphasis on being with and just opening to what is, oftentimes we tend to overlook the huge importance of cultivation. So, cultivating practices like metta, cultivating that quality in the heart, cultivating compassion, samadhi talked about the other day, cultivating that samadhi, that stillness, that collectedness of heart. For some people, devotion, opening to that, cultivating that for some people. I don't know if we can talk about cultivating wonder, but something like cultivating the openness to wonder. Tremendous healing in the cultivation. So not in the direct, necessarily in the direct working with what's actually going on, but in the cultivation rather of the beautiful qualities. Enormous power of that. And not to overlook it and see, am I viewing these things as two equally balanced aspects of practice, two equally balanced wings, the cultivation and the being with. When we talk about cultivation, it's not, really to remind ourselves right from the beginning, it's never a linear process. Like when I was talking about the samadhi, it cannot be a linear process. It's also not easy. But generally, over a lifetime, we just keep cultivating these beautiful qualities. And slowly, gradually, what happens as we cultivate more and more metta, more and more compassion, more and more samadhi, etc., slowly, happiness starts to percolate into the being. Gradually, in a very non-linear way, because these beautiful qualities are builders of happiness. They are builders of happiness. So I find it quite interesting. When we do group retreats, and sometimes we do a guided meditation in the afternoon, and sometimes we make it a metta meditation, and then the teachers get together and say, okay, what phrases shall we use? And there ensues a little debate, and then at some point someone says, what about the word happiness? And it's quite interesting, it's quite charged. Some teachers have the view, we better not use that word. And some say, let's use it. Because I think for some people it's quite a loaded word, and it actually tends to push the wrong buttons in people. So maybe, in some people, maybe in our culture it's come to have quite a superficial resonance. Happy, everything's, but this is quite interesting. I find this quite interesting. Again, if we talk about views of healing, we talk about what's my view of depth of being? What's my view of what it means to go deep? I know that for a long time I had a view that in the real depths is the real misery and the really hard stuff. I don't know that actually bears out in reality, or that it was something the Buddha agreed with. And that's just, I don't want to, go back to what I said at the beginning, I don't want to come down on one side or the other with this. I just want to paint actually what's quite a complex and messy picture of the whole thing. But just to question, if I have a view of depth, what it means to go deeper, is it to uncover more and more stuff that's difficult? Is that what I conceive of as deep? interestingly, the Buddha actually conceived of deeper and deeper happiness as what it meant to go deep. But it's complex. But just to see what's my view. So I have a very good friend who was in psychotherapy for many years and working, but very diligently, and we would get together and I'd say, how's it going? How are you doing? She said, well, I think I feel okay today, or actually I think I feel a bit happy. And then she'd go, I must be in denial. It was coming out of this very very lovely sort of integrity and wanting to sort of question herself, and I could see the same pattern in myself. It wasn't quite so marked, but what are we assuming? What are we assuming about happiness, about suffering, about depth, about reality? And I also remember in my psychotherapeutic process, at some point, feeling really, really unhappy, really, felt like there was such a sort of blockage of personality stuff, such a wrongly made personality, some factors of personality that were just seemingly insurmountable. I'd just been made wrong, probably my parents' fault. But there's something so stuck. And then one day, feeling very unhappy, got up in the morning and decided, this was after I just started coming back to the Dharma, after a number of years away, and decided, I'm just going to do metta, and I will do metta all day. So I got up, dressed, may I be, may you be, etc. Had to do some shopping, and I wasn't working that day, and went and sat in the park, went and did this, did that, did whatever I had to do, metta all day long, shopkeeper, metta. After about probably 3 or 4 hours, started to feel really, really happy. Lovely, lovely happiness come. And this was, because it was so stark, such a stark contrast, this was like just a light bulb going on in my head. And I realized I had been laboring under the illusion, not explicit, unconscious illusion, that I could not be happy until these personality things were fixed, were changed, dissolved, rearranged, whatever language you want to use. And it wasn't quite even a conscious thought. I realized it's hopeless for me. I cannot be happy until there's some reconfiguring. And yet here all I just did, just plugged away at the metta, plugged away and plugged away and plugged away, tenaciously. And then happiness. And I realized, gosh, happiness has nothing to do with this idea I have of my personality and what needs rearranging, etc. It actually comes from the qualities that are in the mind, the qualities that are in the heart, in the present. And because it was so extreme, the unhappiness and the happiness and the sort of views I'd been in, it was just like, oh. And it's actually remained that clear since then. It was one of those rare moments where you just see something and it just remains clear. So the enormous potential of what can be developed through cultivation, through metta, etc. I also remember being involved in a class. It was actually a weekly evening class on metta in the States. And at some point, I think it was towards the end of the class, one of the students asked my teacher, Narayan, she said, I just feel like kind of hunkering down in my own little cocoon of metta to myself, and just huddling up there and giving metta to myself. And she said, is that okay? And Narayan just said, no. And it was a very short interaction. I was like, oh, wow. And afterwards, I can't actually remember what happened. I think it was just that short. And afterwards I sort of reflected on it, and what I came to was that if I just give metta to myself, valuable and beautiful that is, just to be careful, because too much self-attention, too much attention to self and the problems of the self will actually increase the dukkha, actually increases the suffering, because in a way self-obsession, I mean that's a strong word, but it's too much self-attention. So something has to let go of the self-attentiveness and spread out to others. So two very important aspects of the Dharma, this mindfulness, this being with, and this cultivation, hugely important. But I do think that sometimes it's sometimes for some people at some points in their practice, it may be necessary to work in a more sort of psychotherapeutic way or a more psychological way, or work in therapy or whatever, or in some modality that includes more of that. Absolutely. Like any path, if we choose that path at a certain point, like any path that we choose, it will have its benefits, its advantages, and its pitfalls. So we can certainly say this of Vipassana. One of the reasons in the late 80s, when I was in the sort of beginning years of my practice, what was quite common, it doesn't happen so much now, person experiencing difficult emotion, and there was so much emphasis on sort of precision of mindfulness, just really look at it and really see exactly what's going on. The difficult emotion there coming up, this laser beam of attention would go there and sort of connect with the thing and zap it out of all existence. And the person says, I don't have any emotions. Because there was such a heightened precision to the mindfulness. There's actually, for a lot of people, quite a hardness came into the practice and a disconnection from the emotional. This tends to be very rare nowadays because there's a lot more emphasis on metta and working in more gentle ways. But that is one, if we talk about possible pitfalls and possible benefits, that's one of the dangers of a Vipassana path. But also psychotherapy can have certain, or it seems to me at this point, can have certain wonderful benefits that may not otherwise be there for a person, and certain pitfalls. So one of the things that we may learn in psychotherapy and in working, in dialogue with a person and in relationship, that it's hard to learn necessarily so much on the cushion, is the whole skill that we learn in relating, in communicating. So again, when we talk about healing, what often really needs to happen is more that we're learning skills in communicating, learning skills in relating, in intimacy, etc. Learning skills in setting boundaries. It's not always about just connecting with something that's difficult and sort of going through that and then kind of everything will find its place. And certainly also diffusing negative thought patterns and replacing them with positive, which can also happen on the cushion, of course. One aspect that I felt, just kind of sharing personally, that I felt I got from working in a very intense psychotherapeutic setting, it's hard to put it into words, but it's a sort of, because it was reflected back to me from the therapist, a very lovely, loving and almost celebrating of myself, my uniqueness, my beauty, etc. Now there's nothing to do with ego and self-aggrandizement, nothing like that at all. More the sense of the way a parent might love and celebrate the beauty, the uniqueness of their baby or their child. Somehow, and this is a little bit different sort of take or flavour than a sort of typical metta practice, but to me that was a real beautiful and valuable gift that somehow came out of the therapy. This real, it's hard to find words, but tender and loving celebration of myself. I'm not sure now if it's still in vogue in therapy, but the whole work with the inner child, so this is very related to that. I found it extremely useful. one might say, if you're really gung-ho Dharma, but isn't that all self-view? Isn't it all self-stuff? But that is completely okay. Self-view is not bad or even wrong in one level. It's just a view. It's a view that we can pick up and we can work in that way, and it's completely appropriate. It's completely appropriate to talk in terms of me and you and my history and all of that. Completely appropriate, a lot of healing to work at that level. The danger, or the possible danger, is that again we go into this too much self, and the psychotherapeutic process can become just got mired in another spin cycle of self-obsession. There's so much focus on the self and just my process and my. And this is it's not uncommon, put it that way, it's not uncommon. So a person might also feel that they, and I know that I felt, again, just to share personally, at the beginning of, I wasn't actually clear why I was even entering therapy, but one of the things that became clear was that I wasn't very good at identifying my needs, or what I felt I needed emotionally or in a situation or in a relationship. I wasn't even good at identifying it or recognizing it, and I was completely useless at communicating it. And so what happened, and I think this really is a real possible benefit of especially of psychotherapy, is one actually learns to identify, these are my needs, this is what I need in this situation, this relationship, or whatever, and then one learns the skill of communicating that. Great. How often, though, might it go over into an inner environment of feeling entitled? And again, the self has kind of got a bit too big there, a bit too big. And person can do a lot of therapy and feel very good about working through all this, but has actually gone to the other extreme a little bit and become feeling quite entitled in their relationships, in their dealings with the world, in their relationship with money, etc. And in a way, there's quite a me culture, and it just fits right into that. To see also, when we're working a lot in terms of self, how much, because it's self, how much fear is coming in. So it's interesting if working in a sort of psychotherapeutic way. We oftentimes look back at the parents or the upbringing and can see, I feel a lot of gratitude, and that's natural or normal, maybe there's some gratitude. And there's also this anger, maybe anger at the parents. Sometimes there's fear of feeling one of these. This is quite complicated. Anger generally is not very helpful, but sometimes it might be helpful because it might be what's real and what's needed to be felt. But just to see, there's a lot of self and self-investment in the process. Am I afraid to feel the anger? Which is very common for kind of spiritual type people, because there's such a taboo about it. Or, what I've also seen in a trap that I got into is, am I actually afraid to not feel the anger and to feel the gratitude? Because again, that will be some kind of denial and I won't feel my anger and it's necessary to go through this to purify it, etc., etc. There's all this constricting of fear around the self-view. So in the healing, just to see how much fear is there. Am I afraid of this or that? This option or that option, all kinds of options. So go into these views of views of the healing process. This is turns out to be really important. The views we have of the healing process. Sometimes, and again, it's a trap that I got into. We tend to think, if I just remember the past, if I remember what happened, if I know what happened, if I uncover what happened, some trauma or memory or whatever, or if I realize, I have this difficulty now because my mum did da-da-da, or didn't do da-da-da. And I put this cause there, I put the cause on the parents or whatever it is. But somehow assigning the cause in the past like that, understanding that there would be a healing in that. And I felt like I laboured under this illusion for a long time. And it's not necessarily healing, doesn't necessarily lead to any transformation. I just know something, or I think I know something about the past. So for me, this was actually quite intense. There was a feeling of uncovering a lot of very early memories of trauma and abuse and things like that. Well, that's how I was interpreting it at the time anyway. And just doing this, a lot of catharsis, a lot of tears, a lot of opening, a lot of even fear in relation to going through it. And yet, there wasn't this major healing. Some healing, some opening, and yet still waiting. And I would think, just one more. Maybe the next memory. Maybe the next memory. Maybe the next knowing. Maybe that will be the one. And this sort of leaning forward, and to be honest, and it's a little bit weird thing to say, the mind almost wanting to concoct a little bit of memory. Now I'm just sharing what happened to me. I'm certainly not putting that on anyone else. But just to watch out, where's the healing coming from, and what's the whole relationship we're getting into with all of this. It's an extremely common view, extremely common in psychology, in the Dharma, in everyday person on the street, is stuff coming up from the past. So sit on the meditation cushion and you sit and you're just quiet and still, and stuff comes up. Difficult stuff comes up. Either memories or just difficult in the body, the emotions, the heart, the mind, everything. It's just stuff coming up. And some people actually teach, and you can hear it, or the view in psychology or whatever else is, it's stuff coming up from the past. It's purifying, it's releasing itself. Very common. Sometimes we even hold that view without being aware that we hold that view. So again, just to, in the spirit, as I said at the beginning, of questioning, just to unpack, what are actually the views I may or may not have about all of this? Am I holding that view? The Buddha was walking one day and came across this guy standing in meditation. He was just actually standing there, and the Buddha said, "Hi, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm standing here, and I've been standing here, I don't know what it was, 3 days or something. And by standing here and not moving, I'm allowing my old karma, my old stuff to come up, and it just comes up, and thereby I'm purifying my karma. And when it's all come up and gone through and purified, that will be enlightenment. I will be done. And the Buddha said, "Really?" So, how's it going? And the guy said, "I'm not sure." "Oh, how much have you purified? What percentage?" "I don't know." "Oh. How much have you got left to do?" "I don't know." "How will you know when you're done?" "I don't know." And then sometimes the Buddha is actually very judgmental. And I can't remember the last part of the story, but I think he just went away and said, "This is a foolish way to practice," or something. But those might be my words, I don't know. Anyway, the Buddha didn't agree with that. If we hold that view, it's quite likely that we'll get pretty fed up of that process. I have seen some people who are still plugging away after decades, but generally most people get fed up and find some other path where that makes more sense, and so this really is quite common, practice or no practice. So I have several good friends, some of whom practice, some of whom don't, and have this quite common sort of, I don't know what to call it, constellation, a difficult constellation inside, of a feeling that they feel at certain points of just really deep abandonment, really deep disconnection from life, disconnection from the universe, as if their very existence was an actual cosmic mistake. that somehow everyone else was meant to be and they weren't. Really deep existential pain associated with this. Very, very deep. Very, very deep. And quite common as a sort of constellation that a human being is capable of finding themselves in recurrently. But what's quite interesting is it's almost always the case that the person is assuming that this abandonment, this disconnection is a constant underneath. It's actually going on all the time. It's somehow more real in a way than their everyday okayness or whatever else is going on, or some happiness. It's going on all the time, and when they don't feel it, it's because they're spacing out, or distracted, or busy, or just not in touch, or disconnected from their emotions. When they do feel it, that's when they're being more real. And that view is there, and it's unquestioned for decades, often unquestioned. What we're missing with that view is seeing the dependent arising in the present. Seeing that this thing comes up in the present, and somehow in the present, when it's there are conditions that allow it to be present. If there's a fear of it, fear of that sense of abandonment, of disconnection, of emptiness in the non-dharmic sense, if there's a distance from it, that those fear and distance are themselves conditions that feed it in the present. Distance is this kind of disconnection. It's going to feed a sense of disconnection. They may be really strong conditioning factors in the present. So to see, how is this actually being conditioned in the present? So all of this it begins to tie into the wisdom aspect, the panya aspect, the insight aspect. So we talk about mindfulness. One aspect is to see this thing arises and passes, and the Buddha says to see the presence of something and to see the absence of something. This thing has holes in it, it has gaps in it. It's not the solid block that we think. On a large scale and on a small scale, to really look and see that impermanence. And when it's not there, it's really not there. See, it's not it's not hiding somewhere. It's really gone. When it's gone, it's gone. So impermanence, emptiness. What does emptiness have to do with all this? Emptiness has a lot of different meanings, a lot of different ways we can approach it. So just to touch on a few little strands. Working psychologically in the present, we tend to give things a solidity, a reality. Sometimes that's helpful. I see this is my structure, this is my pattern. In terms of meditation and contemplation, all that anything can ever be, all it can ever be is a sensation, an experience that's happening in the moment. All it can ever be is a moment of something. What happens is that self and the view of time glom onto something, and we tend to give it a solidity and a reality, which the actual experience of it does not give. It's all it can ever be is something very ephemeral. It's a brief impression in the moment, an impression in awareness. It's a moment is barely not there. And to see this, it's almost not there. So we add self and time, and we make a thing. We make things. One of the ways that the Buddha encouraged practicing again and again is not just paying attention, not just being mindful, but after a certain point, after one's got some, one's got used to being mindful, is then to add a sort of quiet reflection with the mindfulness. And one of them was whatever is happening, whatever's arising, is not me, not mine, not self. Sensation in the body, thought, emotion, feeling, whatever. Not me, not mine, not myself. And it's really a practice. But just I wanted to paint this picture, so just to, in a way, to tell you a little bit what happens if one really picks up that practice and takes it on board. It takes some time. An emotion or body sensation comes up, usually is difficult. If I reflect not me, not mine, what was difficult, the not me, not mine, the disidentification takes away the difficulty. So what arises is no longer difficult. If we go really deep into this not me, not mine, nothing that's happening is me or mine, not even the awareness is me or mine, things actually begin to stop arising. Or if they're arisen, they begin to dissolve and fade. So I'm just telling you, for the sake of a point that I want to make, what begins to happen in very deep practice. Things actually stop arising or dissolve because we're not identifying with them. The person is practicing that way. Where's the purification then? If purification is supposed to be this experience of difficult stuff coming up, and I'm reflecting not me, not mine, and either the difficulty goes out or the actual experience stops, where's the purification? How can it be purification? And if, according to the Dharma, to see not me, not mine is actually more real, so to speak, than to see me or mine, then to say when I'm looking in a more real way, there's no purification. If nothing is experienced as unpleasant or difficult, nothing is even coming up. So to say, when I look in a more real way, in a more true way, where's the purification gone? How can that be my view of practice? Okay, you might hear that and you might say, well, that sounds like, you're talking about ultimate truth and da-da-da, and that's all very abstract. And you've got to kind of honour relative truth. And there's some truth to that statement. There's relative and abstract, relative and ultimate, and you have to respect the relative truth. Things come up and they're difficult. But this ultimate relative, it's not an either or. It's more like a continuum. When there's a lot of self-view, if I'm really injecting my story into all this, and my history, and my parents, and my grandparents, and all that into what's difficult that's coming up, that's a lot of self. If I take that away, but I'm just viewing this is my stuff coming up, that's a little less self. If I'm viewing not me, not mine, that's a little less. Degrees of letting go of the self. And the amount of difficulty, or the amount of stuff that comes up, will rather be in proportion to the amount of self. How much self-feeling, self-sense is the real amount? How much self-sense, being the real amount, whatever that is, will then show me the real emotion, the real feeling, the real thing that needs to be healed? Who's going to say that? It's completely... So when we talk about emptiness, this is what it means. This is what emptiness really means. How a thing is, the view of how a thing is depends on what's there in the mind. What's there, and the view is shaping the experience. And you can't say what's real, and that's what emptiness means. So sometimes you get another view of emptiness which is more like, it's just all atoms and there's just nothing there. When I look for the body, it's just atoms. When I look for my emotion, I just see it's just these atoms of sensation. That's just a view, actually. That's just a view. That's not what real emptiness means. So begin to see, all this is really, really, I don't know any other word for it, complicated. There's so many, I don't know that I can really come to a conclusion with all this. If I look back at my own process, just to share personally, I think, God, I was involved in so much creating of the difficult and feeling it as a healing, And yet, and I'm hesitant to say this, and yet I wouldn't, I wouldn't swap that. I'm somehow paradoxically and mysteriously glad to have gone through all the years of that catharsis and some of it not even being real. Somehow, out of all that, unwittingly creating a lot of stuff, there was a heart opening. Somehow, other beautiful emotions, religious feeling, etc., came out of that. I don't know. There's just some mystery here. As a teacher, I'm even hesitant in sharing all of this stuff about the emptiness and stuff, because sometimes, is it too soon to say that to a person? Is it too soon? Maybe a person needs to work in this way. You can't jump too quickly and say it's all empty. Maybe they need to go through all that. On the other hand, if someone's just trundling in the same cycle for years and years and years, and it's just going around in an endless way. The belief in stuff coming up is actually part of a view that will add to stuff coming up. So I sit there with the belief, now stuff's, that's what I'm doing in my life, in my practice, stuff is coming up. Actually, as a view, it will cause stuff to come up. So again, just to make sure it's clear, not to say, when there's been trauma, when some things really need healing, and tears and such, completely appropriate. But just this is, when you really go into it, this is a very interesting area. So the release of stuff may be never ending. It may actually be never ending. And in some Dharma circles talk about past lives. And then you go, you have countless past lives and you're supposed to release all that. I mean, forget about it. How long's that going to take? It may be never ending if we are unconsciously creating and contributing to it, continuing it in the present in very subtle ways, with the attention, with the awareness, with the view. In the process of, very earnestly wanting to attend to be with, somehow we're actually creating it. We're just spinning it. And it will be never ending unless we turn the gaze round to look at what and how we are looking. So when the understanding of emptiness goes deep or matures or whatever you want to say, you can actually see the past, even something in the past, say this or this happened with my parents in my childhood, my education, whatever. Even the past is empty of being this way or that way, really. It's empty of inherent existence. It depends on the mind state. Past with a lot of love looks a lot different than past with a lot of contraction and misery and confusion. That's partly why this aspect of cultivation is really important. When the cultivation gets very strong, the mind states move to quite some degree. You can actually see how much the world and the past and everything is influenced by the mind state. And when we see this emptiness of the past, then one can really genuinely feel complete freedom from any sense of burden from the past. There's a very real possibility. There's really no sense that the past in any way is something real or burdensome. So from the point of view of emptiness, instead of talking about the release of stuff, what might be more helpful or more appropriate is the release of views. The release of views. So oftentimes what's got stuck, what needs healing, is the views we have of self, the views we have of other, the views we have of life, of the past. And they have become crystallized. And as the insight into emptiness just gradually, slowly matures, it's those views that are released, those views. So, as I said, I'm not really sure if there's any very clear conclusions from this. I didn't really want, to go back to what I said at the beginning, the intention was really just to explore some of this. What I think is more important maybe than a conclusion is, can there be in our lives, in our practice, an ongoing honesty about all this? Either way. That might be manifest as a kind of fearlessness. Can there be an ongoing fearlessness? That might be the fearlessness of opening to what's difficult. It might be the fearlessness of questioning the reality of it. Can there be this ongoing honesty, fearlessness, questioning, and the deep commitment to the integrity of that? Shall we sit together quietly for a minute?